The vampire king's hand closed around hers the moment the laughter began, and every sound in the ballroom died. Ophelia Hayes had known this was a mistake. She'd known it the second her employer handed her the invitation, insisting she attend as a representative of the household, even though Ophelia was just the governess. The dress she wore was borrowed, 2 seasons out of fashion, and plain cream where everyone else shimmered in jewel tones and silk. The ballroom itself was a cathedral of wealth, all vaulted ceilings and chandeliers that cast golden light over the divide between human nobility and vampire aristocracy. The event was meant to celebrate the treaty, 10 years of peace between the two worlds. But the sneers suggested some wars never ended. She'd been standing near the refreshment table, trying to be invisible, when Lady Constance Fairmont's voice had cut through the music. How quaint. They're letting the help attend now. The words had been loud enough to carry. Heads turned. Ophelia's cheeks burned. Perhaps she thought this was a costume affair, another woman added, her tone dripping false sweetness. How charming, to come dressed as a scullery maid. The laughter that followed was polite but vicious. Ophelia wanted to disappear into the marble floor. She knew these people, had served their children, had listened to their gossip through thin walls. She thought herself prepared for their disdain, but standing here in front of hundreds while they mocked her plain dress and low birth made her stomach twist with humiliation. She turned to leave. That was when she felt it. The air changed first, growing colder and sharper, as if the room itself held its breath. Then came the silence, so absolute that Ophelia heard her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She looked up. The vampire king was crossing the ballroom floor toward her. Ophelia had seen Ragnar Valdis before, but only from a distance, a pale figure on the dais during ceremonies. Up close, he was otherworldly. White hair fell past his shoulders, contrasting sharply with his black formal attire. His skin was the color of moonlight, flawless and cold-looking, and his eyes were a deep crimson that should have been terrifying, but instead held an intensity that rooted her in place. He moved with a predator's grace, each step deliberate, and the crowd parted for him like a sea before a ship's prow. He stopped directly in front of her. The entire ballroom watched. "Your Majesty," Ophelia managed, dropping into a curtsy that felt clumsy and inadequate, his hand extended, palm up, an invitation. "She dances with me tonight." His voice carried across the silent room, a declaration rather than a request. Ophelia stared at his offered hand, her mind spinning. This was the vampire king. He didn't dance with governesses. He didn't dance with humans at all, as far as she knew. The treaty had brought cooperation, but not intimacy. She started. "Unless you'd prefer to stand here while they continue their performance," he said, quieter now, meant only for her. "But I find their entertainment rather dull." There was something warm in his tone, something almost conspiratorial. Ophelia made her decision in a heartbeat. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, cool and steady, and he led her onto the dance floor. The orchestra, which had fallen silent, scrambled to begin a waltz. Ophelia barely heard the music. All she could focus on was the king's hand settling at her waist, the other holding hers as they fell into the rhythm of the dance. "You're trembling," he observed. "You're the vampire king," she replied, then immediately regretted how breathless she sounded. "Ragnar," he corrected. "And you are?" "Ophelia Hayes." "Ophelia?" He said her name like he was tasting it, considering it. "You dance well for someone so terrified." "My mother taught me, before she died." "Then she taught you well." They turned, and Ophelia caught glimpses of the watching crowd. Lady Constance's face was pale with shock. Others whispered behind fans and gloved hands. The vampire nobility on the other side of the room watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to displeasure. Ophelia's heart hammered. "They're all staring," she whispered. "Let them. This will cause talk." "Good. I was growing bored of the usual gossip." She looked up at him, searching his face for some explanation, some reason why a king would cross a ballroom to defend a nobody. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a spark of interest, maybe amusement. "Why did you do this?" she asked. "Because they insulted you." "People insult me all the time. I'm a governess. It's practically in the job description." "Not in my presence." The waltz carried them across the floor. Ragnar moved with effortless grace, guiding her through turns she'd only practiced with her sisters when they were children. This was nothing like those clumsy attempts in their tiny parlor. This was magic, even if it was terrifying magic. "You're different than I expected," Ophelia said before she could stop herself. "How so?" "The stories say vampires are cold, cruel." She hesitated. "Yes? You smiled at me when you asked me to dance. It was brief, but I saw it. Perhaps I'm a very good actor." "Are you?" He looked at her for a long moment, and this time the smile wasn't brief at all. "No, I'm terrible at pretending." The dance ended. Applause rippled through the ballroom, uncertain and scattered. Ragnar released her waist but kept hold of her hand, raising it to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was brief, formal, but Ophelia felt it like a brand. "Thank you for the dance, Ophelia Hayes," he said. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Ragnar," he corrected again. Then he was gone, returning to the dais where the Vampire Council waited with expressions that promised later conversations would be tense. Ophelia stood alone in the center of the dance floor, her hand still tingling where he'd kissed it, her heart doing things that were absolutely inappropriate for someone who'd just met a man, king or otherwise. She was falling, she realized dimly, falling hard and fast for someone completely impossible. The rest of the ball passed in a blur. People whispered, but no one dared approach her directly. She caught Lady Constance glaring from across the room, but the mocking laughter had ceased entirely. When the evening finally ended, Ophelia slipped out into the night, her borrowed dress feeling less plain somehow, her chin held a little higher. She didn't expect to ever see the Vampire King again. She was wrong. The next morning, a messenger arrived at the Thornberry household where Ophelia worked. The family was at breakfast when the knock came, and Ophelia answered it herself since the butler was occupied. The man at the door wore the black and silver livery of the vampire court. He held a sealed envelope. "Miss Ophelia Hayes." "Yes?" "From His Majesty." He handed her the envelope and departed before she could respond. Ophelia stared at the heavy paper, the wax seal bearing a crest she recognized from history books. Her hands shook as she broke it open. The message was brief, written in elegant script. "I would speak with you, tonight if you're willing. The address below. Come alone. R." Below was an address in the city's old quarter, near where the vampire district began. "Who is that?" Ophelia jumped. Mrs. Thornberry stood in the hallway, her expression curious and slightly suspicious. "A message," Ophelia said, folding the paper quickly. "A friend. You left the ball rather quickly last night. We saw you dance with the king." "Yes, madam." "That was quite the spectacle." Ophelia waited for the reprimand, the dismissal. Something. Mrs. Thornberry simply studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, best not keep friends waiting. You may have the evening off." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, madam." She spent the day in a state of anxious anticipation, teaching the Thornberry children their lessons while her mind spun with questions. Why did the king want to see her? What could he possibly have to say? Was this dangerous? That last question nagged at her. Vampires and humans coexisted under the treaty, but there were still rules, still boundaries. Vampires didn't feed from humans without consent, and humans didn't enter vampire territory without cause. Meeting the king alone could be seen as reckless, but Ophelia had never been good at caution, and the memory of his hand in hers, the warmth in his voice when he'd said her name, overrode every sensible objection. As the sun set, she changed into her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and made her way through the city streets. The address led her to a townhouse tucked between newer buildings, its architecture older, elegant in a way that spoke of centuries rather than decades. She knocked. Ragnar himself answered the door. He wasn't wearing the formal attire from the ball. Instead, he dressed in simple black trousers and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His white hair was tied back loosely. He looked less like a king and more like a man, though the crimson eyes and otherworldly beauty remained unchanged. "You came," he said, and there was genuine pleasure in his voice. "You commanded it." "I invited. There's a difference." He stepped aside. "Please." Ophelia entered. The townhouse was furnished simply but beautifully, all dark wood and deep colors. A fire crackled in the sitting-room hearth, which struck her as odd until she remembered vampires could tolerate warmth even if they preferred cold. "Is this your home?" she asked. "One of them. I use it when I want privacy from the court." "The court being?" "Intrusive." He gestured to a chair. "Sit, please. Would you like tea? Wine? I'm told I'm supposed to offer refreshments." "You're told?" "I don't entertain often." He looked almost sheepish. Or ever, really. Ophelia sat, charmed despite herself. Tea would be lovely. He disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen, returning moments later with a tray bearing a teapot and 2 cups. He poured for both of them with surprising grace. "You drink tea?" she asked. "On occasion. It doesn't sustain us, but the ritual is pleasant." He settled into the chair across from hers. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't certain you would." "Why did you ask me here?" "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure." He cradled his cup, studying her over the rim. "Last night at the ball, when I heard them mocking you, I felt something I haven't experienced in a very long time." "What?" "Anger. On someone else's behalf." He set the cup down. "I've been king for 3 centuries, Ophelia. I've seen humans and vampires at their worst and best. I've negotiated treaties, ended wars, made choices that affected thousands of lives, and somewhere in all of that, I stopped feeling much of anything. Until last night." Ophelia's breath caught. "I don't understand." "Neither do I." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, that intense gaze fixed on her. "Tell me about yourself. Where you're from, what you love, what you fear. I want to know." "Why?" "Because when you looked at me last night, you weren't afraid. You were nervous, yes, but not afraid. Everyone is afraid of me, Ophelia, even my own council. But you just seemed curious." She considered lying, playing it safe. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. "My father was a scholar, low-born but brilliant. He taught me to read, to think, to question. My mother loved music and dancing. They died when I was 15, a fever that swept through our district. I became a governess to survive. I teach children, read when I can, and try to make enough to help my younger sisters." "You have sisters?" "2, Gemma and Rose. They work in a dress shop." "And you send them money?" "When I can." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father taught you well. You carry yourself with more dignity than half the nobles in that ballroom." "They certainly didn't think so. They're fools." His voice held an edge. "Birth doesn't determine worth. I learned that long ago." "Easy to say when you're a king." "I wasn't always." He stood, moving to the fireplace, gazing into the flames. "I was born the youngest son of a minor noble family. No claim to the throne, no particular power. I earned my position through 5 decades of war and politics. So when I say birth doesn't determine worth, I speak from experience." Ophelia rose, drawn to him despite every bit of common sense screaming at her to maintain distance. "Why are you telling me this?" He turned. The firelight cast shadows across his pale features. "Because I want you to know me, not the king. Me. I don't understand what you want from me." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But I'd like to find out. If you're willing." Her heart thundered. This was insane. He was a vampire king. She was a governess. There were 1,000 reasons to walk away. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that mirrored the loneliness she'd felt her entire life, the sense of being separate from the world around her. "I'm willing," she whispered. His smile was slow, genuine, and utterly devastating. "Then have dinner with me tomorrow night. Here, I promise I can manage better than tea." "I'll need to tell the Thornberrys something." "Tell them you're visiting family. It's not entirely a lie. You're visiting me, and I'm about to become very invested in your well-being." She laughed despite herself. "That's presumptuous. I'm a king. Presumptuousness comes with the crown." She left an hour later, her mind spinning, her chest tight with something that felt dangerously like hope. As she walked home through the darkening streets, she didn't notice the figure watching from the shadows, noting her exit from the king's private residence with great interest. The next evening, Ophelia returned, and the evening after that, and the one after that. They fell into a pattern over the following weeks. She would finish her duties at the Thornbury household, then make her way to the townhouse where Ragnar waited. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her stories of the old world, of wars fought with swords and magic, of the moment the treaty had been signed and he'd realized peace might actually be possible. She told him about her students, about her sister's dreams, about the books she read by candlelight when everyone else was asleep. He cooked for her, which was surprisingly good despite his claims of inexperience. She taught him to play cards, which he was surprisingly bad at despite his centuries of life. "You're cheating," he accused one night, glaring at his losing hand. "I'm not cheating. You're just terrible at bluffing." "Impossible. I've negotiated with warlords." "Maybe they let you win." He threw his cards down in mock outrage, and she dissolved into laughter. These moments felt stolen, precious, separate from the real world where he was a king and she was nobody. But the real world had a way of intruding. It started with small things: whispers when she walked through the market, strange looks from Mrs. Thornbury. Then came the letter. Ophelia found it slipped under the door of her small room in the servants' quarters. No signature, just a warning scrawled in harsh script. "Stay away from the vampire king. His favor will destroy you." She showed it to Ragnar that evening. His expression went cold, the warmth she'd grown accustomed to vanishing behind a mask of royal fury. "Someone is threatening you. It's just a letter. It's a warning." He stood, pacing the sitting room like a caged predator. "They want to frighten you away from me." "Who?" "My court, most likely. Or the human nobles. Take your pick." He stopped, running a hand through his white hair. "They see you as a threat to the status quo." "I'm a governess. How am I a threat to anyone?" "Because I care about you." The words fell between them, heavy and undeniable. Because the king showing favor to a low-born human upsets the careful balance they've built. Because change terrifies people, even when the current system is rotten. Ophelia's chest tightened. "You care about me?" He crossed to her in 3 strides, taking her hands in his. His skin was cool, but his grip was gentle. "Ophelia, I've lived for centuries. I've known thousands of people. And in all that time, I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You make me remember what it's like to want something beyond duty and politics. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You see me, not the crown or the power, but me." "Ragnar, I know it's complicated. I know there are obstacles, but I am not letting anyone threaten you. I will keep you safe. I don't need you to protect me. I know you don't need it, but I want to anyway. Let me." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "Please." She looked up at him, this impossible man who'd somehow become the center of her world in just a few short weeks. She was in love with him. The realization settled over her like inevitability. "Okay," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest. He was solid and cool and right. "We need to be careful," he said quietly. "The council is already questioning my judgment. If they think you're influencing me, am I?" "Absolutely, but in the best way." She pulled back to look at him. "What do we do?" "There's a gathering next week. Another diplomatic function, smaller than the ball, but important. Human and vampire representatives discussing trade agreements. I want you there." "As what? The help?" "As my guest, publicly and officially." Ophelia's stomach dropped. "Ragnar, that's necessary. If we hide, they'll use it against us. Better to be open, to show them you belong at my side. But I don't belong, you know that." His hands framed her face, tilting it up. "You belong wherever you choose to be, and I choose to stand beside you. Let me introduce you properly. Not as a scandal, but as someone important to me. Let them see what I see. What if I embarrass you? Impossible. What if I don't know the right things to say or do? Then you'll learn. Ophelia, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be yourself. That's more than enough." She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her, old wounds from a lifetime of being dismissed and overlooked. "I'll think about it," she said finally. He accepted that, though she could see the worry in his eyes. The gathering came faster than Ophelia expected. She agonized over what to wear, eventually borrowing a dress from her sister Gemma, who worked magic with a needle and thread. It was deep blue, simple but elegant, and it made Ophelia feel almost beautiful. Ragnar sent a carriage for her. When she arrived at the venue, a historic mansion on the border between human and vampire districts, he was waiting at the entrance. "You look breathtaking," he said, offering his arm. "You're biased." "Extremely, but also correct." They entered together. The gathering was smaller than the ball, perhaps 100 people, but the faces were familiar. Human nobles, vampire council members, and there, near the center of the room, Lady Constance Fairmont and her circle, the same women who'd mocked Ophelia at the ball. Ophelia's steps faltered. Ragnar's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Steady," he murmured. "I'm here." They moved into the room. Conversations paused. Eyes tracked them. Ragnar guided her to a group of vampire dignitaries, introducing her without preamble. "This is Ophelia Hayes, a dear friend and my guest this evening." The vampires greeted her with cool politeness. One, a severe-looking woman with white hair even longer than Ragnar's, studied Ophelia with undisguised interest. "A governess, I'm told," the woman said. "Yes," Ophelia replied, lifting her chin. "I teach the Thornberry children." "How quaint. And you know His Majesty how?" "We met at the ball last month." "Ah, yes, that dance. Quite the statement." Ragnar's expression didn't change, but Ophelia felt the tension in his arm. "Counselor Sibylla, perhaps we could discuss the trade agreements. I believe that's why we're here." The conversation shifted to politics. Ophelia listened, fascinated despite her nerves. The discussion was complex. Debates about blood supply ethics, territorial boundaries, human employment in vampire businesses. She'd never considered these details before, but listening to the arguments, she found herself forming opinions. "What do you think, Miss Hayes?" Ophelia startled. Counselor Sibylla was watching her expectantly. "I'm sorry." "You've been listening intently. Surely you have thoughts on whether humans should be required to sign waivers before working in vampire establishments." It was a test. Ophelia knew it. The room had quieted, waiting. She took a breath. "I think consent is critical, but it needs to be informed consent. If humans don't understand the risks, then waivers are just protection for the employer, not the employee. Perhaps mandatory education programs would serve both communities better than legal documents most people don't bother to read." Silence. Then Sibylla smiled, and it looked almost genuine. "An interesting perspective. Practical. Thank you, Counselor." The conversation resumed. Ragnar's hand squeezed hers briefly, a silent communication of pride. The evening progressed. Ophelia navigated conversations with surprising success, her natural intelligence and her father's training serving her well. She discussed literature with a vampire scholar, trade routes with a human merchant, and music with a composer who'd written pieces for both species. She was actually enjoying herself until Lady Constance appeared. "Miss Hayes, how surprising to see you here." Ophelia turned. Lady Constance stood with two other women, all dressed in expensive gowns that made Ophelia's borrowed dress look shabby by comparison. "Lady Constance, good evening. I must say, your social climbing is impressive, from governess to the king's pet in less than a month." The words were delivered with a smile, but the venom was clear. Ophelia felt her face heat. "I'm not anyone's pet." "Oh, then what are you? Surely you don't imagine this is real? That a vampire king would genuinely care for someone like you?" "That's enough." Ragnar appeared at Ophelia's side, his voice cutting through the conversation with the force of a blade. "Lady Constance, you overstep." "I merely speak the truth, Your Majesty. We all know how this ends. She's a curiosity, a momentary diversion. When you tire of her, I will never tire of her. And if you value your family's standing in this city, you will apologize, now." The threat was unmistakable. Lady Constance paled. "I apologize," she said stiffly, "to her, not to me." "Miss Hayes, I apologize." Ophelia nodded, her throat tight. Lady Constance retreated, her companions following like ducklings. "I'm sorry," Ragnar said quietly. "I should have anticipated that." "It's fine." "It's not. Come, let's get some air." He led her out to a terrace overlooking the gardens. The night air was cool, and Ophelia breathed deeply, trying to calm the storm in her chest. "She's right, you know," Ophelia said. "She's not." I don't belong here, Ragnar. I can pretend. I can wear nice dresses and have intelligent conversations, but at the end of the day, I'm still just a governess, and you're a king. So? So this can't work. You know it can't. He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Why not? Because you'll need a queen. Someone appropriate, someone who knows how to navigate politics and court intrigue, someone you navigated tonight beautifully. You impressed Sibylla, and she's impossible to impress. You held your own in conversations about topics you'd never studied. You were brilliant. I was lucky. You were yourself. His voice softened. Ophelia, I don't want someone appropriate. I want you, stubborn, brilliant, kind you. Your court will never accept me. Then I'll convince them, or replace them. I'm the king. I can do that. You can't just watch me. His intensity took her breath away. I have lived for 300 years, and I have never wanted anything the way I want this, the way I want you. So if you're trying to push me away because you think I deserve better, save your breath. You're what I want. Tell me you want this too. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. You know I do. Then we fight for it, together. She kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about propriety or who might see. She just rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. He went still for half a heartbeat, then kissed her back with a fierce tenderness that made her head spin. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and for a moment the world narrowed to just this, just them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ragnar rested his forehead against hers. That was unexpected, he murmured. Good unexpected. The best unexpected. They returned to the gathering hand in hand. Let people stare. Let them talk. Ophelia was done hiding, but the consequences came swiftly. 2 days later, Ophelia was summoned to the vampire council chambers. The message arrived while she was teaching the Thornberry children their morning lessons. A courier in official livery handed her a sealed summons requiring her presence that afternoon. Mrs. Thornberry found her in the hallway staring at the paper. What is it? The vampire council wants to see me. Oh, Ophelia. Mrs. Thornberry's expression was pitying. What have you gotten yourself into? I don't know. The council chambers were located beneath the city, in tunnels that predated modern construction. Ophelia descended stone steps lit by gas lamps, her heart hammering. A vampire attendant met her at the bottom, gesturing for her to follow. The chamber itself was circular, with high ceilings and walls carved with intricate patterns. 7 chairs arranged in a semicircle, 6 of them occupied. Councillor Sibylla sat in the center. Ragnar's chair, recognizable by its higher back and more ornate design, stood empty. Miss Hayes, Sibylla's voice echoed in the space. Thank you for coming. I didn't think I had a choice. You always have choices. Please stand there. She indicated a spot at the center of the semicircle. Ophelia moved to it, feeling horribly exposed. Do you know why we've summoned you? Sibylla asked. I assume it has to do with the king. Indeed. His Majesty's interest in you has not gone unnoticed, nor has your influence over him. I don't have influence over him. Don't you? Another councillor spoke, a man with sharp features and calculating eyes. He brings you to official functions. He defends you publicly. He spends his evenings at his private residence instead of attending to court matters. That suggests considerable influence. Ophelia's hands clenched at her sides. He makes his own choices. Choices that affect all of us, Sibylla said. The king is not simply a man, Miss Hayes. He is a symbol, a leader, the face of our people. His actions have consequences beyond his personal happiness. What do you want from me? We want to understand your intentions. My intentions. Do you seek to become queen? To leverage your relationship with His Majesty for power or status? The accusation stung. No, I don't want power. I don't even want to be here answering these questions. Then what do you want? Him. The word came out fierce, honest. I want to know him, to be with him, that's all. The councillors exchanged glances. Sibylla leaned forward. The king is suggesting that you be given an official position at court, an advisor perhaps, or a liaison to the human community. Ophelia's stomach dropped. He what? He wants to legitimize your presence, to give you standing so that your relationship doesn't appear improper. I didn't ask him to do that. We know, which is why we're speaking to you directly. Sibylla's expression was unreadable. Here is the reality, Miss Hayes. The treaty between our peoples is fragile. There are factions on both sides who would love an excuse to break it. The king openly favoring a low-born human provides that excuse. Already, we're hearing rumblings from human nobles who see it as an insult, and from vampires who see it as weakness. So you want me to leave him? We want you to prove you're worth the risk. Silence fell. Ophelia stared at the counselors, trying to process what they were asking. How? There will be a crisis, Sibylla said, engineered by those who oppose the treaty. We don't yet know what form it will take, but it's coming. When it does, you will need to resolve it, not the king, you. Demonstrate that you can navigate our world, that you can be an asset rather than a liability. And if I can't, then we will respectfully ask you to remove yourself from His Majesty's life for the good of both our peoples. Ophelia's chest felt tight. Does Ragnar know about this? No, and we trust you won't tell him. He would see it as manipulation, which it is, but necessary manipulation. The king is powerful, Miss Hayes, but even he must answer to the needs of his people. If you truly care for him, you'll want what's best for him, even if that means proving yourself worthy of standing at his side. That's not fair. Very little in life is. Sibylla stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Go home, Miss Hayes. Wait. When the crisis comes, you'll know. Ophelia left the council chambers feeling shaken. She wanted to go to Ragnar, to tell him everything, but Sibylla's words echoed in her mind. If she told him, he would intervene, would try to protect her. And maybe the council was right. Maybe she did need to prove herself, not just to them, but to herself. She couldn't live in Ragnar's shadow forever. If they had any chance at a real future, she needed to be his equal, or as close as a human could come. The crisis came 3 days later. It started with a murder. A human merchant found dead in the vampire district, drained of blood. The method was unmistakable, and witnesses reported seeing a vampire fleeing the scene. The city erupted. Human newspapers screamed about treaty violations and vampire savagery. Protesters gathered outside the Vampire Council building. The mood turned ugly fast. Ragnar worked around the clock trying to manage the situation. Ophelia saw him only once during those first 2 days, when he stopped by the townhouse briefly, looking exhausted. This is bad, he said, accepting the cup of coffee she pressed into his hands. Whoever killed that merchant knew exactly what they were doing. The timing, the location, everything designed for maximum damage. Do you know who did it? We're hunting them, but even when we catch them, the damage is done. Trust is broken. People are afraid. What can I do? He looked at her, surprise flickering across his features. Nothing. This isn't your burden. Ragnar. I mean it. Stay safe. Stay out of sight. The humans are looking for someone to blame, and our relationship is already controversial enough. He left before she could argue, but Ophelia couldn't just sit idle. She thought about Sibylla's words, about proving herself. An idea formed. She started with Lady Constance. Finding the woman wasn't difficult. Constance held a weekly salon at her townhouse, and Ophelia simply showed up at the door. The butler tried to turn her away, but Ophelia insisted, and eventually Constance herself appeared, looking annoyed. Miss Hayes, this is unexpected. I need to speak with you. Privately. Constance hesitated, then gestured her inside. They entered a sitting room where several other women were already gathered, teacups balanced on saucers. Ladies, would you excuse us? Constance said. They left, but not before shooting curious glances at Ophelia. Once alone, Constance's expression turned cold. What do you want? To talk. About what's happening. The murder, what about it? You have influence among the human nobility. I've heard you speak at functions. People listen to you. And I think you could help calm things down, issue a statement, organize a peaceful response instead of letting fear turn into violence. Constance laughed. Why would I do that? Because riots hurt everyone, including your family's business interests in the vampire district. That got her attention. Go on. The merchant who was killed, he wasn't the first human to do business with vampires, and he won't be the last. If this turns into war, trade collapses. Your family imports goods through vampire-controlled ports. You'd lose everything. We'd survive. Maybe, but why take the risk when you could be the voice of reason, the noble who kept the peace when others called for blood? That's the kind of reputation that could serve you well. Constance studied her. You're cleverer than I gave you credit for. I'm trying to help. Why? The king could handle this. The king is doing everything he can. But sometimes problems need more than one solution. And maybe this is one area where a human voice would carry more weight than a vampire one. Constance was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. I'll consider it, but I want something in return. What? An apology from His Majesty for threatening my family's standing. Ophelia bristled. He was defending me. I know, and perhaps I deserved it. But if I'm to put my reputation on the line, I need to know that we can move past old grievances, public or private, I don't care. Just something. It was fair, actually. Ophelia nodded. I'll speak to him. Then we have an understanding. Ophelia left, feeling like she'd accomplished something, but she wasn't done. Over the next 2 days, she visited every contact she'd made at the gathering, calling in favors, making arguments, appealing to self-interest where idealism failed. She met with human merchants, vampire scholars, anyone who might have influence. She barely slept. She missed work, claiming illness. Mrs. Thornberry didn't question it, though her expression suggested she knew exactly what Ophelia was doing. On the 3rd day, the Vampire Council announced they'd captured the murderer, a rogue vampire acting alone, already executed for violating treaty law. But that wasn't enough to calm the anger. Protests continued. Tensions remained high. That night, Ophelia stood in the city square, surrounded by a crowd that had gathered to hear speakers call for retribution. She'd convinced Constance to speak, and the woman was there, along with several other nobles Ophelia had recruited. But she'd also done something risky. She'd asked Ragnar to come, to stand in the crowd not as a king, but as a citizen, to listen rather than command. She found him at the edge of the square, hooded to avoid immediate recognition. "What is this?" he asked. "Trust me." Constance spoke first. Her voice carried across the square, amplified by the acoustics of the surrounding buildings. "I know you're angry. I know you're afraid. 3 days ago, a man was murdered in a way that violated everything we thought we'd gained with the treaty. You want justice. You deserve it. But justice and vengeance aren't the same thing." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some agreeable, some hostile. "The Vampire Council has executed the murderer. That's justice. What you're calling for now is collective punishment. You want to hurt all vampires for the actions of one. Ask yourself, is that who we are? Is that the city we want to live in?" A voice shouted from the crowd. "They're monsters." "Some are," Constance agreed, "just like some humans are. But I've done business with vampires for 20 years. I've found them honorable, fair, no better or worse than we are. Judge individuals, not entire peoples." Another speaker stood, a merchant Ophelia had convinced. He talked about trade, about prosperity, about the benefits of peace. Then a vampire scholar spoke, addressing the crowd with careful respect, acknowledging their pain and fear. Slowly, the mood shifted. Not all the way, but enough. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Ragnar pulled Ophelia aside into an alley. "That was you, all of it. I just made some suggestions. Ophelia, you organized this, you brought them together. Someone had to. I'm the king, it's my job. And you were doing your job. But maybe this needed a different approach, someone without the weight of a crown." She met his eyes. "I wanted to help. I wanted to do something that mattered." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You incredible, stubborn, brilliant woman. You just diffused a crisis that could have destroyed the treaty. We're not done yet. There's still fear, still anger. But you gave us breathing room. You showed that cooperation is possible." He pulled back to look at her. "The council is going to hear about this. They're going to know it was you." "Good." His laugh was soft, admiring. "You're fearless." "I'm terrified, but I love you, and I'm not going to let fear stop me from fighting for us." The words hung in the air. She'd said it, finally. Ragnar's expression went soft, wonder and joy mixing together. "Say that again. I love you. I love you too. So much it terrifies me." He kissed her, gentle and deep, a promise in the touch. They stood there in the alley, wrapped in each other, while the city slowly calmed around them. The following week, Ophelia was summoned to the council chambers again. This time, Ragnar accompanied her. They descended the stone steps together, his hand warm in hers despite his naturally cool temperature. When they entered the circular chamber, all 7 seats were occupied, including Ragnar's. "Your Majesty, we asked to speak to Miss Hayes alone," Sibylla said. "And I insisted on being present," Ragnar replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sibylla sighed. "Very well. Miss Hayes, we've been discussing your recent actions." Ophelia's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I did what I thought was right. You organized a coalition of human and vampire voices, diffused a potentially catastrophic riot, and demonstrated more political acumen than some members of this council." Sibylla's expression was approving. "Well done." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you. However, we need to address the larger issue, your relationship with His Majesty." Ragnar stiffened beside her. "That's not up for discussion." "With respect, Your Majesty, it is. The two of you have made your feelings clear. Miss Hayes has proven herself capable. But we need clarity on how you intend to proceed." "I intend to court her, publicly and properly." "To what end?" "Marriage, eventually, if she'll have me." The chamber fell silent. Ophelia's heart stopped. They'd never discussed this, never talked about forever. But hearing him say it so matter-of-factly made her chest tight with emotion. "A human queen?" one of the other counselors said. "That's unprecedented." "So was the treaty. We've already broken precedent. Might as well keep going." Ragnar's hand tightened around Ophelia's. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you of my intentions." "And what of heirs?" another counselor asked. "Vampires and humans cannot have children together." "Then we won't have heirs, or we'll adopt. There are options." "Your Majesty." "Enough." Ragnar's voice cut through the protests. "I have led this council for 3 centuries. I have earned the right to choose my own partner. Ophelia has proven herself capable, intelligent, and diplomatic. She will be an asset to our court, to our people. If you cannot accept that, then perhaps it's time for new counselors." The threat was clear. Sibylla's lips twitched, almost a smile. "We accept," she said. "But there's one more matter. Miss Hayes, you're human. You age. His Majesty does not. Have you considered what that means for your future?" Ophelia had. She'd thought about it during every sleepless night, every quiet moment. "Yes," she said. "I have. And I want to stay human." Ragnar's head turned sharply toward her. They'd never discussed this either. "Vampirism is a gift we could offer," Sibylla said. "Immortality, the chance to stand truly equal with His Majesty." "I don't want it." Ophelia's voice was firm. "I've seen what immortality does, the weight of centuries, the loneliness. I don't want to lose my humanity, my connection to the world as it changes. I want to live fully, completely, for however long I have, and I want to spend that time with Ragnar if he'll accept that." She looked at him. His expression was unreadable. "You'd grow old," he said quietly. "You'd die, and I'd continue on." Yes. That's not fair to me." "I know, I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing." His hand cupped her face. "If this is what you want, if this is how you want to live your life, then I'll treasure every moment we have. I'd rather have 50 years with you as you are than 500 years with someone changed into something they never wanted to be." Tears pricked her eyes. "You're sure?" "Completely." He kissed her forehead. "We'll make the most of it." Sibylla cleared her throat. "Well, that settles that. Miss Hayes, the council formally recognizes you as the king's consort, will arrange appropriate housing and an official position. I suggest liaison to the human community, given your recent success." "Thank you, counselor." "Don't thank me yet. You've got a lot of work ahead of you. The crisis may be diffused, but there's still healing needed. Both communities will be watching you." "I'll do my best. I know you will." They left the council chambers hand in hand, emerging into the fading sunlight. Ragnar had to avoid the direct rays, but the shadows were deep enough for him to stand comfortably. "A consort," Ophelia said. "That sounds very official." "It is. You'll have duties, responsibilities. Will I get a crown?" "If you want one." I was joking. I wasn't. He pulled her close, there in the shadowed alley. "Ophelia Hayes, you're remarkable. I hope you know that." "I'm just me." "Exactly." They kissed, slow and sweet, the world narrowing to just the two of them. The next months were a whirlwind. Ophelia moved from the Thornbury household to quarters in the Vampire Court, a beautiful suite of rooms that felt too grand for someone who'd spent her life in servants' quarters. She continued her work as a liaison, building bridges between human and vampire communities, resolving disputes, organizing joint events. She brought her sisters to the court, setting them up in positions that suited their talents. Gemma became a court dressmaker, her skill with a needle earning respect from the notoriously difficult vampire nobility. Rose joined the court musicians, her voice bringing beauty to formal events. Ophelia and Ragnar courted properly, with all the ceremony and tradition that came with vampire royalty. He brought her gifts of books and music. She brought him terrible jokes and homemade pastries that he pretended to enjoy despite not needing to eat. They danced at every function, walked through gardens at night when he could move freely, talked for hours about everything and nothing. She met resistance, of course. Some vampires still saw her as an interloper. Some humans saw her as a traitor. But slowly, steadily, she won people over. Not through grand gestures, but through consistent kindness, intelligence, and genuine care for both communities. A year after the first ball, another event was planned. This one was different, though. It was called the Unity Celebration, commemorating not just the treaty, but the continued cooperation between humans and vampires. Ophelia stood in her quarters, adjusting the dress Gemma had made for her. It was deep crimson, the color of Ragnar's eyes, with delicate silver embroidery that caught the light. She looked different than she had a year ago, more confident, more herself. A knock came at the door. Ragnar entered, stunning in formal black with silver accents that matched her embroidery. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "You're nervous." "A little. This is different than the other events. This one feels important." "It is. But you'll be brilliant. You always are. You're biased. Hopelessly." He kissed her knuckles. "Come, let's show them what partnership looks like." They entered the ballroom together. It was the same venue as the first ball, but the atmosphere was different, warmer. Humans and vampires mingled freely, conversations flowing easily. The divide that had been so stark a year ago had softened, though it hadn't disappeared entirely. Ophelia saw Lady Constance across the room and nodded. Constance nodded back, a gesture of mutual respect. They'd never become friends, but they'd found a working relationship built on honesty and shared goals. The music started. A waltz, the same one that had played when Ragnar first asked her to dance. He turned to her, offering his hand. "May I?" She smiled. "Always?" They took the floor. This time, no one stared in shock. This time, it felt natural. Right. As they moved through the steps, Ragnar leaned close. "I have something to ask you." "Now?" "Why not?" His eyes gleamed with amusement and nervousness. "Ophelia Hayes, will you marry me?" She stumbled, catching herself against his chest. "What?" "I know we discussed it with the council, but I never asked you properly. So I'm asking now. Marry me. Be my wife, my partner, my queen in all but name, since you've refused the crown multiple times. Spend your life with me, however long we have." Tears blurred her vision. "Yes, obviously yes." He lifted her, spinning her once before setting her back on her feet. Around them, people began to notice, to applaud. But Ophelia only had eyes for Ragnar. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, more than I thought possible." They finished the dance to thunderous applause. As the music ended, Ragnar raised his voice to address the gathered crowd. Friends, allies, citizens of both our peoples. Tonight I'm honored to announce my engagement to Ophelia Hayes. She has proven herself a bridge between our worlds, a voice of reason and compassion. I am a better king and a better man because of her. The applause continued. Ophelia saw her sisters in the crowd, both crying happy tears. She saw Sibylla nodding approval. She saw humans and vampires alike celebrating. It wasn't perfect, There were still challenges ahead, still prejudices to overcome, still work to be done. But standing there, surrounded by people who had learned to see beyond their differences, Ophelia felt hope. The celebration continued late into the night. Eventually, Ophelia and Ragnar slipped away to the gardens, seeking a moment of quiet. They sat on a bench beneath a willow tree, its branches creating a curtain of privacy. The sounds of music and laughter drifted from the ballroom, but here it was peaceful. "Do you ever regret it?" Ragnar asked. "Choosing this life?" "Never. Do you?" "Not for a second." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I meant what I said earlier. However long we have, I'll treasure it." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "What happens now?" Ophelia asked eventually. "Now we plan a wedding. You continue your work as liaison. I continue being insufferably proud of everything you accomplish. We build a life together." "Sounds perfect. It won't always be easy." "I know, but nothing worth having ever is." He kissed the top of her head. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best." "Your father?" "Him too. But I was talking about you." His laugh was soft, pleased. "Come on, we should go back before they send a search party." They returned to the ballroom hand in hand. The celebration continued around them, but Ophelia felt like she was floating. A year ago, she'd been insulted at a ball, dismissed as unworthy. Tonight, she was celebrated, accepted, loved. The wedding took place 3 months later. It was held at sunset, that brief window when Ragnar could stand in the fading light without discomfort. The ceremony blended human and vampire traditions, vows spoken in both languages, promises made before witnesses from both communities. Ophelia wore a gown of silver and white, crafted by Gemma with such care that it brought tears to everyone's eyes. Ragnar wore formal attire with the royal crest, looking every bit the king he was. When the officiant pronounced them married, when Ragnar kissed her as the last light faded and the first stars appeared, Ophelia felt complete. This was where she belonged, not because a king had chosen her, but because she had chosen this path, fought for it, earned her place through her own merit and determination. The years that followed were full. Ophelia continued her work, expanding programs that brought humans and vampires together, mediating disputes, building trust. She became known as the Peacemaker, a title she wore with quiet pride. Ragnar ruled with wisdom and compassion, his decisions often influenced by discussions with Ophelia late into the night. They were partners in every sense, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses. They didn't have children. The biological impossibility of a human and vampire producing offspring was absolute, and while they discussed adoption, they ultimately decided their work was their legacy. The bridges they built, the peace they maintained, that was what they would leave behind. Time passed. Ophelia aged, silver threads appearing in her dark hair, lines forming around her eyes and mouth. She remained beautiful to Ragnar, who saw in every wrinkle a story, a laugh, a tear, a life fully lived. On their 20th anniversary, they returned to the same ballroom where they'd met. It had become tradition, an annual celebration that now attracted people from across the region. Ophelia stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching the crowd. She was 63 now, her joints a bit stiffer, her steps a bit slower. But her mind was sharp, her spirit undimmed. Ragnar appeared at her side, unchanged as he'd been 20 years ago. He would remain this way long after she was gone, and they both knew it. They'd made peace with it. "May I have this dance?" he asked, offering his hand just as he had that first night. "Always," she replied, just as she always did. They moved onto the floor. The music swelled, the same waltz they'd danced to on that first night, and every anniversary since. "Do you remember?" Ragnar asked, guiding her through a turn. "Every detail. The way you looked when you crossed the floor. The sound of the laughter dying, the feel of your hand in mine. I was terrified." "You were?" "Absolutely. I knew the moment I touched your hand that everything was about to change." "I was right." She smiled up at him. "No regrets?" "None. You?" "Not a single one." They danced, surrounded by people they'd helped bring together, in a world they'd helped shape. The girl who'd been mocked for her plain dress had become a woman who changed history, not through power or title, but through persistent compassion and unwavering determination. The vampire king, who'd been alone for centuries, had found a partner who made immortality feel less like a curse and more like a gift, even if that gift had an expiration date. As the song ended, Ragnar dipped her low, and Ophelia laughed, the sound bright and joyful. He pulled her upright, holding her close. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love you too, always." Always was relative when one partner was mortal and the other eternal. But in that moment, with music playing and people celebrating around them, always felt like enough. They had tonight. They had each other. They had the life they'd built together, imperfect and precious and entirely theirs. And that, Ophelia thought as Ragnar spun her one more time, was more than she'd ever dreamed possible on that night, so long ago when a king had crossed a ballroom floor and changed her world forever. The future would bring challenges. Ophelia's health would eventually fail, and Ragnar would face the grief he'd known was coming since the day they met. But they'd face it together, with the same partnership that had carried them through 2 decades of joy and struggle. For now, they danced, they lived, they loved, and in the end, that was the only story that mattered.